The morning air hung thick with tension inside the concrete walls of the Bendler block. November 12, 1943. The date would burn itself into the memories of two men whose world was about to collapse. Berlin's gray sky pressed down on the massive building at 76 Tirpitz-Ufer. Inside these walls, the German army's intelligence machine hummed with quiet desperation. Two officers sat facing each other across a scarred wooden desk. The silence between them carried the weight of an empire crumbling. Colonel Reinhard Gehlen controlled Foreign Armies East. His counterpart, Colonel Alexis von Rona, commanded Foreign Armies West. Both men had climbed to these positions through years of meticulous work. Their reputations rested on cold analysis and brutal honesty about enemy capabilities. Now they stared at papers that would destroy everything they thought they knew. The documents looked ordinary enough. Standard American military forms, bureaucratic paperwork captured during recent fighting in Italy. Nothing in their appearance suggested they contained mathematical proof of German defeat. The forms were typical Army logistics reports, columns of numbers, supply deliveries, equipment requisitions, the kind of mundane paperwork that kept armies moving. But the numbers inside these forms told a story of industrial might so overwhelming it defied comprehension. Both officers had spent the previous week checking and rechecking these figures. They had cross-referenced sources. They had searched desperately for errors. They had hoped against hope that somehow, somewhere, there was a mistake that would make these numbers less catastrophic. The mathematics remained unchanged. The conclusions remained unavoidable. Von Rona's hands shook as he slid the top document across the desk. The paper rustled in the quiet room. It was a simple supply form from the American Fifth Army in Italy. Monthly delivery targets for a single American corps operating in the Italian campaign. The form bore multiple stamps, official dates, signatures from logistics officers. Every mark confirmed its authenticity. Gehlen studied the figures in complete silence, his face drained of color as the implications hit him. The Americans were delivering more ammunition to one corps in 1 month than the entire Wehrmacht received on the Eastern Front during the same period. He looked up at von Rona. His eyes searched his colleague's face for some sign this was deception or error. Von Rona's expression offered no comfort whatsoever. He had worked through these same calculations. He had reached these same impossible conclusions. He had spent 3 sleepless nights hoping he was wrong about everything. "This cannot be accurate," Gehlen whispered. His voice carried no conviction. He wasn't stating a belief. He was expressing a desperate wish that reality might somehow be less terrible than the evidence suggested. Von Rona reached for another document from the stack. His movements were slow and deliberate. "I thought the same thing," he replied quietly. "This is a fuel delivery report. Same corps, single month of operations." He paused to let the weight of his words settle. They received 3.2 million gallons of gasoline, another 800,000 gallons of diesel fuel. The numbers hung in the air between them like smoke from burning cities. "I compared this to our own fuel allocations," von Rona continued. "Army Group Center operates 3 full armies. Over 500,000 men. They received less fuel in a month than this one American corps." The two intelligence officers had spent the entire week engaged in precisely this kind of comparison. American documents cross-referenced against German logistics reports. Prisoner interrogations matched with aerial reconnaissance data. Agent reports from neutral countries analyzed alongside captured equipment studies. Every source pointed to the same impossible conclusion. America wasn't just outproducing Germany. They were operating on a scale that made German industrial capacity look primitive. The numbers told a story no amount of courage could change, no tactical brilliance could overcome, no ideological fervor could defeat. Germany was fighting against arithmetic itself. Arithmetic always wins. The path to this moment of terrible clarity had begun months earlier. but its roots stretched back years into fundamental miscalculations about American potential. German intelligence services had tracked Allied industrial capacity since before the war began. They compiled detailed reports on factory locations, production capabilities, resource availability, raw materials and transportation networks. But they had consistently, catastrophically, underestimated what America could achieve when fully mobilized for war. This wasn't simple incompetence. The assumptions built into German strategic thinking were shaped by Nazi racial ideology, by Germany's own industrial experience, by fundamental misunderstandings about how American industry actually worked. These assumptions made American industrial power seem not just unlikely, but literally impossible. Germany's wartime experience colored everything they believed about industrial production. By 1943, the Reich had mobilized every available resource. They had stripped occupied territories of raw materials and machinery. They had implemented slave labor on a massive scale. They had pushed industrial capacity to what seemed like absolute limits. German factories operated around the clock. Workers put in extended shifts that would have been unthinkable in peacetime. Production of weapons and ammunition had increased dramatically from pre-war levels. Germany was producing tanks and aircraft and artillery at rates that seemed miraculous compared to 1939 levels. Yet despite this total mobilization, despite conquering most of Europe and exploiting its resources, despite the desperate intensification of production under Albert Speer's direction, Germany was losing the material war decisively. The fundamental German miscalculation had begun before the first shot was fired in anger. May 1940. President Franklin Roosevelt stood before Congress and made an announcement that seemed to defy industrial reality. America would produce 50,000 aircraft annually. This was just the beginning of a massive rearmament program that would dwarf anything the world had ever seen. Over the following months, Roosevelt expanded this vision into something that sounded like pure fantasy: 185,000 aircraft, 120,000 tanks, 55,000 anti-aircraft guns, 18 million tons of merchant shipping, all within 2 years. These figures traveled to Berlin through multiple intelligence channels, diplomatic sources, neutral country observers, signals intercepts, press reports. When presented to Hitler and his advisors, the German leadership's response was immediate and dismissive. The numbers were obviously American propaganda, designed to intimidate Germany and boost Allied morale through sheer audacity. The assessment seemed entirely reasonable based on available data at the time. In 1939, American military aircraft production totaled fewer than 3,000 planes annually. The United States Army ranked 18th in the world by size, smaller than Portugal's army. American tanks were obsolete designs, few in number, rarely seen outside training exercises. The U.S. Navy, while substantial on paper, was divided between two oceans. It focused on coastal defense rather than power projection. Most American naval vessels were aging designs from the previous war. How could a nation with such limited military capacity suddenly increase production 60-fold in just 2 years? It violated every principle of industrial mobilization that German experience had established. Building factories required years of construction. Training workers demanded months of instruction. Developing efficient production techniques required extensive trial and error. Roosevelt's proclamation seemed like the fantasy of a desperate politician rather than achievable industrial reality. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe and one of Hitler's closest advisors, reportedly laughed when he heard Roosevelt's announcement. While this account comes from secondary sources rather than contemporary German documents, multiple historians cite Göring's statement that Americans could only make refrigerators and razor blades. They could never produce the military equipment necessary to defeat Germany. Whether the exact quote is historically accurate, the sentiment it captured was certainly genuine and widespread. German leadership believed American industrial capacity was fundamentally unsuited for military production. This assessment seemed supported by observable facts that appeared convincing. America excelled at producing consumer goods. Automobiles rolled off assembly lines. Household appliances filled department stores. But military equipment required different expertise entirely. Different organizational structures, different engineering approaches, different quality standards. German industry had been preparing for war since 1933. How could American consumer goods manufacturing possibly match German military industrial capacity that had been years in development? The Germans failed to understand something fundamental about American industrial potential, something that would prove decisive in the coming years. The Great Depression had idled massive amounts of industrial infrastructure across the United States. Factories sat empty or operated at minimal capacity. Millions of skilled workers remained unemployed or severely underemployed. Machine tools that could produce components for automobiles, tractors, or refrigerators sat idle or operated at reduced capacity. What looked like economic weakness was actually enormous reserve capacity waiting to be activated by the right circumstances. When Roosevelt called for military mobilization, he wasn't asking American industry to build entirely new capability from nothing. He was asking them to convert existing factories, rehire laid-off workers who still possessed their skills, redirect machinery that was already built, installed, and proven effective. The infrastructure for industrial mobilization already existed across America. It required only redirection rather than creation from scratch. Germany, by contrast, had no such reserve capacity available for exploitation. By 1940, German industry was already operating at near maximum capacity. The Nazi regime had been rearming steadily since 1933, expanding military production year after year after year. There was little idle capacity left to activate. Few unemployed skilled workers remained to rehire. Minimal machinery sat unused in shuttered factories. German expansion could only come through three difficult paths: building new factories from scratch, which took years; conquering territories with existing industrial capacity, which required military success; or exploiting slave labor, which was inefficient and morally catastrophic. Each approach faced inherent limitations and took enormous time to implement effectively. The fundamental difference in starting positions meant everything. American unused capacity versus German full utilization. This meant America could scale up production far faster than Germany could possibly match, and they were scaling from a much larger industrial base to begin with. The German intelligence services bore institutional responsibility for tracking Allied capabilities accurately. Foreign armies west, under Colonel von Roen's leadership, collected information from multiple sources around the clock. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights photographed Allied installations when possible. Signals intelligence intercepted radio communications between Allied units. Agent networks operated carefully in neutral countries, gathering information from travelers and diplomats. Systematic interrogation programs debriefed, captured prisoners extensively. Documents captured during military operations were analyzed methodically for intelligence value. Throughout 1941 and 1942, as America entered the war and began mobilizing its industrial capacity, the intelligence picture reaching Berlin remained frustratingly incomplete and confusing. Reports of American production capacity varied wildly depending on source and methodology. Some reports indicated massive increases in output, factories running multiple shifts around the clock, tens of thousands of aircraft rolling off assembly lines that hadn't existed months before, production facilities being constructed at unprecedented speed across the American continent. Other reports suggested continued economic struggles that limited mobilization, labor disputes disrupting production schedules, inefficient methods slowing output, equipment of inferior quality compared to German standards. The German High Command chose to believe the more comforting assessments, the ones that aligned with their preconceptions about American weakness and German superiority. This selective acceptance of intelligence was not unique to German military culture. All military organizations tend to favor information that confirms existing beliefs over data that challenges core assumptions. But in Germany's case, the cost of this cognitive bias would prove absolutely catastrophic for the entire war effort. After all, Germany was winning decisively in 1941 and early 1942. The Wehrmacht had conquered Poland in a matter of weeks. France fell in 6 weeks. Yugoslavia surrendered in 11 days. German forces occupied Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, most of France, and significant portions of the Soviet Union. The Luftwaffe had proven itself the most formidable air force in the world through repeated victories. German tanks and tactical methods were clearly superior to those of any opponent they had faced. German U-boats were sinking Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced, or so Berlin believed at the time. Why should German leadership fear a nation that had not fought a major war since 1918? Whose army was tiny and inexperienced? Whose tanks were obsolete designs? Whose industrial capacity was oriented toward consumer goods rather than military hardware? This comfortable certainty began developing serious cracks in North Africa during 1942 and 1943. When American forces landed in Operation Torch on November 8, 1942, German commanders expected to face inexperienced troops with inferior equipment. Troops who could be quickly defeated and pushed back into the sea through superior German tactics and experience. What they encountered was something else entirely, something that didn't match their expectations or assumptions. The Americans were indeed inexperienced. That assessment proved accurate in early engagements. The Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943 resulted in humiliating American defeats that seemed to confirm German superiority. German forces drove American units back over 50 miles. They killed over 1,000 American soldiers. They captured substantial numbers of prisoners. They seized significant quantities of equipment and supplies. German tactical superiority was demonstrated conclusively on the battlefield. But something about the American forces troubled experienced German commanders who had fought in multiple campaigns. The sheer quantity of their equipment was staggering and completely unprecedented in German experience. American units that suffered heavy losses in battle were fully re-equipped within days, sometimes within hours of their defeat. Vehicles, weapons, ammunition, and supplies flowed in seemingly endless streams from massive supply depots. German units that won tactical victories found themselves unable to exploit their success. American logistics simply absorbed the losses and continued operations without any apparent pause. Captured American supply dumps contained more material than entire German army groups possessed after years of careful accumulation. American artillery units fired ammunition at rates German forces could only dream of achieving with their limited allocations. American infantry units were motorized to a degree the Wehrmacht had never achieved, even with its most elite formations. General Erwin Rommel commanded Axis forces in North Africa from February 1941 until his recall to Germany on March 9, 1943. He began sending increasingly alarmed reports to Berlin as the campaign progressed. Each American infantry division, he noted with growing concern, possessed more trucks than an entire German corps. American logistics units operated vehicle fleets larger than those available to entire German armies. Supply installations captured during German advances contained food, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, medical supplies, and equipment in quantities that seemed wasteful, even obscene by German standards where every bullet was carefully rationed. Rommel, renowned for his tactical brilliance and aggressive leadership, understood that tactics became irrelevant when facing such massive material superiority. No amount of tactical skill could overcome unlimited enemy resources indefinitely. He urged complete withdrawal from North Africa, arguing that Allied air superiority, naval superiority, and unlimited logistics made Axis defeat inevitable regardless of battlefield success. These reports were received, noted, filed, and largely ignored by the High Command in Berlin. Rommel was known for pessimism, for always requesting more resources, for emphasizing difficulties over opportunities. His complaints were dismissed as the usual grumbling from field commanders, the predictable tendency of generals to exaggerate enemy strength while minimizing their own capabilities. Hitler personally rejected Rommel's assessments with characteristic decisiveness. He insisted that willpower and tactical superiority would overcome mere numerical disadvantages. The Führer's worldview could not accommodate the possibility that industrial production might matter more than ideological commitment or military skill. But the intelligence analysts studying these reports could not so easily dismiss what they were seeing in the field. Throughout 1943, as the war turned decisively against Germany on multiple fronts simultaneously, the volume of concerning data increased exponentially with each passing month. After the surrender of Axis forces in Tunisia on May 13, 1943, German intelligence conducted systematic interrogation of approximately 125,000 captured German soldiers among the 250,000 to 275,000 total Axis prisoners taken in North Africa. The debriefing teams operated from detailed questionnaires developed by intelligence services. They sought to understand not just tactical details of the fighting, but broader patterns of Allied, particularly American, military capability. The stories these prisoners told were remarkably consistent across rank, unit, and experience level. Every single interrogated prisoner described American supply abundance that seemed wasteful by German standards where scarcity was constant. They spoke of entire meals being thrown away because soldiers didn't like the taste. Fresh food discarded, while German soldiers survived on ersatz rations. They described American vehicles being abandoned after minor mechanical problems. It was easier to requisition a replacement than repair the original. They recounted seeing supply dumps larger than anything in the German army experience. These installations contained food, ammunition, fuel, and equipment in quantities that appeared genuinely unlimited. Medical supplies were available in abundance, including sulfa drugs that were increasingly scarce throughout Germany. Captured prisoners received better food as POWs than they had eaten as active soldiers in the German army. Some accounts seemed so extreme that interrogators initially suspected exaggeration or Allied propaganda designed to demoralize German forces. But the consistency across hundreds of independent interrogations made dismissal impossible. Officers and enlisted men told the same stories. Paratroopers and infantry described identical experiences. Tank crews and artillerymen reported the same overwhelming American material superiority in every engagement. More significantly, these prisoner accounts matched exactly what German forces were experiencing on other fronts across the expanding war. In Sicily, captured during July and August 1943, German forces encountered identical patterns of American abundance. In Italy, where Allied forces landed in September 1943, the pattern repeated with mathematical precision. Everywhere German forces engaged Americans directly, they found enemies with seemingly unlimited supplies, backed by inexhaustible industrial production. These prisoner accounts, while deeply concerning to intelligence analysts, could theoretically still be dismissed as subjective impressions colored by defeat. Exaggerated stories from defeated soldiers trying to explain their failure to skeptical interrogators. But then the captured documents began arriving in Berlin in much greater numbers. These documents could not be dismissed as subjective or exaggerated. Unlike POW accounts based on personal observation, supplied documents were clinical and bureaucratic. They were undeniably factual. They were not meant to impress anyone or intimidate enemies. They were simply the routine paperwork of American military logistics, the mundane forms that tracked supplies through the vast military distribution system. The numbers these forms contained were absolutely apocalyptic for German strategic planning. One particular document proved especially illuminating and devastating: a monthly supply report from an American Army Corps operating in Italy during autumn 1943. The report was properly stamped and signed by multiple logistics officers at different levels. It listed deliveries and consumption for a single month of routine operations. The Corps consisted of approximately 80,000 men, comparable in size to a German Army Corps, but the comparison ended there completely. The American Corps had received 3.2 million gallons of gasoline and 800,000 gallons of diesel fuel during 1 month. Colonel Gehlen compared this directly to fuel allocations for German forces on the Eastern Front, where fuel shortage was a constant limiting factor. Army Group Center consisted of multiple corps with several 100,000 men total. It received less total fuel in a month than this single American Corps consumed in routine operations. The disparity wasn't marginal or explainable by tactical differences. It was a difference of kind rather than degree. The ammunition figures in the same report proved even more devastating to German strategic calculations. The American Corps had received 15,000 tons of artillery ammunition during the month. German Corps received perhaps 2,000 tons during the same period, and that was considered adequate supply by German standards. The Americans were firing artillery shells at 7 times the German rate. More crucially, this rate was completely sustainable month after month. This wasn't some special preparation for a major offensive where supplies were concentrated temporarily. This was normal operating procedure for routine monthly operations. The implications staggered anyone who understood military logistics. American artillery could provide fire support at rates that would exhaust German ammunition supplies in a matter of days, and they could maintain this indefinitely without any apparent strain on their supply system. The vehicle replacement figures told an equally disturbing story about American industrial capacity. During 1 month of routine operations, not major battles or intensive combat, just normal operational activity, the American Corps had received specific replacement quantities that defied German experience. 847 trucks arrived as replacements, 127 jeeps, 43 tanks, 68 artillery pieces. These weren't additions to unit strength or preparation for offensive operations. These were simply routine replacements for combat losses and mechanical failures to maintain authorized equipment levels. The German Army had received fewer tanks from total national production in the previous month than this one American Corps received as routine maintenance replacements. The mathematical implications were inescapable and terrifying. If America could replace losses at this rate for one corps, and they had dozens of corps deployed across multiple theaters simultaneously, then their total logistics capacity exceeded German production by orders of magnitude. Colonel von Roena approached these captured documents with the methodical precision that had made him one of Germany's most respected intelligence officers. He came from aristocratic Prussian military lineage. His family had served German military interests for generations. He embodied the professional Prussian officer class tradition: methodical analysis, attention to detail, commitment to objective evaluation regardless of personal preferences. The captured American documents represented hard data that could be quantified, compared, and analyzed systematically. He began calculating with mathematical precision. If one American Corps consumed supplies at this documented rate, and the United States had deployed dozens of such corps across the Mediterranean, Pacific, and in preparation for operations in Western Europe, then total American logistical capacity was beyond anything Germany could match or even comprehend. Von Roen requested additional intelligence on American industrial production from every available source his organization could access. What came back over the following weeks was compiled from multiple independent intelligence sources operating across the world. Agent reports arrived from Switzerland and Sweden, where German intelligence maintained active networks among diplomats and business contacts. Neutral country trade statistics were analyzed for patterns indicating American production levels. Technical manuals captured with American equipment listed manufacturer details and serial numbers that allowed production estimates. Analysis of equipment serial numbers from captured vehicles and weapons provided data for estimating production volumes and rates. Open-source intelligence from American newspapers and magazines published information about factory expansion and production achievements that American censorship apparently considered acceptable. Each individual source had significant limitations and potential for error or deception. But when multiple independent sources confirmed the same basic picture from different perspectives, the conclusions became undeniable. The overall pattern was too consistent to dismiss as coincidence or propaganda. The American tank production story proved particularly revealing and deeply disturbing to German strategic planners. In 1941, America had produced approximately 4,521 tanks, according to German intelligence documentation. German analysts had noted this figure and considered it thoroughly unimpressive compared to German capabilities. Germany produced more tanks that year. The German assessment seemed entirely reasonable and confirmed their assumptions. America was clearly behind in military preparation, exactly as expected from a peacetime economy suddenly thrust into wartime production. But by 1942, American tank production had reached 26,688 units, a more than six-fold increase in a single year that seemed to defy industrial reality. German intelligence officers initially suspected these figures were propaganda designed for morale purposes, or perhaps they included every type of armored vehicle regardless of actual combat capability. But systematic analysis of captured equipment, detailed POW interrogations, and agent reports all confirmed the numbers were essentially accurate. Real combat tanks in quantities that strained credibility. And 1943 brought even more shocking data that challenged every assumption about industrial capacity. American tank production reached 37,198 units, representing the peak year of American tank production during the entire war effort. Germany, by contrast, had produced roughly 5,530 tanks in 1942, according to their own production records. In 1943, German production reached approximately 11,693 tanks. These German figures represented significant increases over pre-war production levels and required enormous industrial efforts. Factory expansion programs, extended shifts that pushed workers to exhaustion, streamlined production methods that eliminated every possible inefficiency. German industry was operating at maximum sustainable capacity, and production of 11,600 tanks in a year was considered an impressive achievement that demonstrated German industrial strength. Yet the Americans were producing more than 3 tanks for every one Germany built. The gap was widening rather than narrowing despite German efforts. More disturbing still, American production was accelerating, while German production struggled under the increasing weight of Allied bombing campaigns and critical resource shortages. Aircraft production statistics proved even more lopsided and alarming for German strategic planning. Germany produced approximately 15,596 military aircraft in 1942, according to post-war analysis by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey of captured German production records. This figure represented a significant increase from previous years, and German leadership celebrated it as definitive proof of industrial strength and successful mobilization. The Luftwaffe was being equipped with modern fighters and bombers in substantial numbers that seemed adequate for German needs. But American aircraft production in 1942 reached 47,136 planes, more than 3 times German output from an industrial base that had been considered inferior for military production. When German intelligence officers first encountered these figures through various sources, They assumed the numbers were propaganda or included training aircraft, gliders, and non-combat types. But careful analysis proved the figures represented combat aircraft directly comparable to German military types: fighters, bombers, attack aircraft, reconnaissance planes, real military equipment, not training aids or propaganda props. In 1943, the disparity widened further in America's favor, despite German efforts to increase production. American production reached 85,298 aircraft, while German production, despite intense efforts to increase output through every available method, reached approximately 26,500 planes. The Americans were building more than 4 aircraft for every one Germany produced. The mathematical implications for air warfare were staggering and depressing. In 1944, American production would reach 96,318 aircraft, while German production peaked at approximately 39,877 planes, before declining under the devastating impact of Allied bombing campaigns. By war's end, the United States would produce approximately 300,317 military aircraft total, a figure that exceeded even Roosevelt's ambitious 1940 projections that had seemed like impossible propaganda. The sky belonged to the Allies not because of superior pilot skill or aircraft quality, though both certainly mattered in combat. The sky belonged to the Allies because American factories could build planes faster than German pilots could shoot them down, faster than German factories could replace their losses. The mathematics of attrition warfare favored whoever could produce the most equipment. But perhaps the most devastating comparison involved merchant shipping production. This directly addressed what German naval strategy depended upon for victory. The U-boat campaign was designed to sink Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced, thereby strangling Allied supply lines and forcing negotiated peace. Germany grasped a fundamental truth about global warfare. Maritime transportation formed the backbone of all military logistics. The vast Atlantic became the decisive theater where German submarines hunted to cut the lifelines connecting America to Britain. The strategy was elegantly simple, yet potentially devastating. Sink merchant vessels faster than shipyards could replace them. Watch Allied supply chains crumble. Force Britain into starvation and surrender. Render American industrial might meaningless by preventing it from crossing the ocean. The submarine campaign represented Germany's calculated response to overwhelming American production capacity. Ships carried the weapons. Ships carried the fuel. Ships carried the food. Destroy those ships, and production statistics became irrelevant numbers on paper. German naval commanders tracked every sinking with meticulous precision. Each torpedo hit represented progress toward ultimate victory. The year 1942 brought unprecedented success for the undersea fleet. German submarines sent 1,122 Allied vessels to the ocean floor. The tonnage totaled 6.3 million tons of precious shipping. These numbers represented the highest annual destruction rate of the entire conflict. Month after month, the submarines struck with deadly efficiency. Victory seemed within reach. The Battle of the Atlantic appeared to be tilting decisively toward Germany. Allied shipping losses mounted faster than replacements could arrive. Convoy routes became graveyards. Merchant sailors faced death with every voyage. German submarine commanders became household names. Propaganda celebrated their heroic exploits. Radio broadcasts trumpeted each successful patrol. Newspapers featured photographs of decorated U-boat captains returning to port. Admiral Karl Dönitz commanded the submarine fleet with unwavering confidence. His predictions painted a clear picture of inevitable Allied collapse. Sustained sinking rates would force surrender long before American factories could tip the balance. Mathematics favored Germany. Time favored Germany. The ocean depths would swallow Allied hopes for victory. Yet something impossible was happening throughout 1942. Despite staggering losses at sea, Allied shipping capacity continued expanding. Ships disappeared beneath the waves in record numbers. More ships appeared in Allied ports than ever before. The contradiction defied everything Germany understood about maritime warfare. Intelligence reports began mentioning something called Liberty ships. These were standardized cargo vessels rolling off American production lines at extraordinary speeds. Initial German analysis dismissed the reports as obvious propaganda. The claims seemed too absurd to merit serious consideration. American shipyards allegedly built these 10,000-ton vessels in just 42 days on average. Some supposedly emerged complete in less than 2 weeks. Such construction times violated every known principle of naval architecture. Ship construction had always been methodical. Craftsmen worked for months or years creating each vessel. Traditional shipbuilding required thousands of individually fitted parts. Skilled workers riveted every joint by hand. Welding work alone consumed many weeks for vessels of such size. Construction times under 6 weeks seemed physically impossible given normal production methods. Yet prisoner interrogations consistently described dozens of Liberty ships crowding American harbors. Captured documents reference serial numbers running into the thousands. Limited Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights photographed American coastal shipyards. The aerial images showed multiple identical vessels in various construction stages. Intelligence reports from neutral countries confirmed massive American shipyard expansion. Agent networks reported unprecedented construction activity along both coasts. Von Roena requested technical evaluation from German naval intelligence. He needed expert assessment of whether reported production rates could theoretically exist. The response shattered German assumptions about industrial capacity. American shipyards were indeed achieving the impossible production rates through revolutionary construction techniques. Traditional riveting gave way to welding throughout entire vessels. This required different skills, but dramatically reduced construction time. Sequential construction from keel upward was abandoned entirely. Americans prefabricated complete sections simultaneously in parallel production lines. Bow sections took shape in one area, while stern sections grew in another. Deck assemblies and engine compartments developed in separate workshops. These enormous components then joined together like massive building blocks. Assembly line principles migrated from automotive plants to maritime construction. Henry Ford's manufacturing revolution found new application in shipyards. Every aspect of the process was redesigned for maximum speed rather than traditional craftsmanship. Dedicated Liberty ship facilities replaced converted traditional shipyards. Every tool and workflow was optimized for rapid production. Tens of thousands of new workers received training in specialized welding and fabrication skills. Women entered shipyard work in unprecedented numbers. The transformation was complete and staggering. Peak production achieved 3 completed Liberty ships daily across all American yards combined. The 1943 totals revealed the true scale of this industrial achievement. American shipyards launched 19.2 million tons of merchant shipping in that single year. German U-boats sank 2.6 million tons during the same period. America was replacing sunken ships more than 7 times faster than submarines could destroy them. Individual vessels remained vulnerable to torpedo attack. Specific convoys still faced mortal danger. But the overall mathematical equation had shifted decisively against German strategy. Even unprecedented U-boat success rates could not overcome American production volume. Even if every patrol resulted in multiple kills, replacement ships would still exceed losses by enormous margins. The Battle of the Atlantic was being lost through simple arithmetic rather than tactical failure. Germany could not sink vessels fast enough to prevent the industrial avalanche from reaching European shores. 2 specific Liberty ships demonstrated American capabilities with crystal clarity. The SS Robert E. Peary emerged from her builder's ways in November 1942. Construction time from keel laying to launch was 4 days and 15.5 hours. The SS Joseph N. Thiel followed in September 1942 with a 10-day construction record. German naval intelligence initially dismissed these reports as propaganda fabrications. Multiple independent sources confirmed both vessels existed and the timing was accurate. The Maritime Commission acknowledged these were special incentive projects built as publicity demonstrations. Extensive prefabrication occurred before official keel laying. Significant fitting-out work continued after launch. These extreme records were never repeated because they proved inefficient for regular production. Even accounting for these qualifications, the fundamental capability remained undeniable. American shipyards could construct ocean-going cargo vessels in days rather than months. This demonstrated industrial capacity that Germany simply could not match or counter. These revelations accumulated throughout 1943 like hammer blows against German strategic planning. Each intelligence report confirmed and amplified the picture of overwhelming American industrial dominance. The scope of the challenge became clearer with every analysis. Colonel Galen focused his attention on Eastern Front intelligence. Yet he began studying American industrial infrastructure through available sources. Technical publications provided detailed information. Pre-war industrial surveys offered baseline data. American newspapers and trade journals supplied current production figures. What emerged from this research explained how such production was possible. The explanation made Germany's strategic situation appear even more hopeless. The fundamental imbalance was staggering in its magnitude. Pre-war assessments credited the United States with approximately 41% of global industrial capacity. Germany controlled perhaps 12%, even after conquering most of Europe. French factories labored under German direction. Belgian industry served German needs. Czechoslovak production supplemented German output, yet the combined total still fell far short of American capacity. Raw percentage comparisons told only part of the devastating story. American industry operated with scale and efficiency that German production could never match. The differences were structural and systemic rather than matters of organization or effort. A captured American technical manual illuminated these differences with shocking clarity. The document was intended for factory foremen and production supervisors at the Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Detroit. This single facility employed 10,000 workers producing M4 Sherman medium tanks using assembly line principles borrowed directly from automotive manufacturing. Peak monthly production at this one plant reached 896 tanks in December 1942. Sustained monthly output ranged between 600 and 800 completed vehicles. The entire German tank industry in early 1943 produced approximately 600 tanks monthly across all facilities combined. One American factory equaled Germany's total national tank production. This was merely one of multiple American tank manufacturing plants. The manual revealed production methods that German industry had never implemented at such massive scale. Tanks moved down assembly lines exactly like automobiles. Subassemblies developed in parallel production streams. Hull sections took shape in one area, while turrets grew in another location. Engines and transmissions emerged from separate assembly lines. Final assembly brought these components together in carefully choreographed sequences. Workers specialized in specific tasks rather than crafting entire components. Specialized jigs and fixtures ensured proper fit without requiring skilled adjustment. Interchangeable parts eliminated individual customization requirements. Quality control employed statistical sampling rather than inspecting every component. The entire system prioritized volume production over flexibility or craftsmanship. German tank production retained characteristics of traditional manufacturing. Skilled craftsmen fitted components together with careful individual attention. Tolerances remained tight. Finished quality exceeded American standards. Individual workmanship showed in every detail. German tanks represented superior engineering in many respects. Better armor protection, more powerful main guns, more sophisticated mechanical systems. Panther and Tiger tanks inspired genuine fear among Allied crews who faced them in combat. But Germany produced approximately one Panther for every 15 Shermans that American factories completed. Mathematical reality made quality differences strategically meaningless. A single Tiger might destroy 5 Shermans in direct combat. If Americans could deploy 15 Shermans against each Tiger, the superior German tank would still be overwhelmed through sheer numbers. Intelligence revealed that America operated multiple tank production programs simultaneously at different facilities. Companies with various specializations contributed to military manufacturing. The M4 Sherman alone rolled off assembly lines at 11 different plants. Automotive companies like Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors applied mass production expertise to military hardware. Agricultural equipment manufacturers like Allis-Chalmers contributed heavy machinery fabrication skills. Locomotive builders like Baldwin and Lima brought large-scale welding and metalworking capabilities to tank construction. These companies possessed no previous tank-building experience. They simply applied existing manufacturing knowledge and mass production techniques to military requirements. The results proved devastatingly effective for American war production. This distributed production model provided resilience that centralized German manufacturing could never match. Bombing one Sherman production facility barely affected total output because 10 others continued operation. Strategic bombing could never cripple American tank production because no single facility represented critical vulnerability. German production concentration created obvious targets for enemy bombing. Successful attacks on key facilities could significantly impact national production totals. The decentralized American approach was simultaneously more productive, more resilient, and more capable of rapid expansion. Artillery production followed identical patterns of overwhelming American superiority. Germany manufactured approximately 11,000 artillery pieces of all types during 1943. Howitzers, field guns, anti-tank weapons, anti-aircraft guns represented maximum output that German industry could sustain. This figure included production from occupied territories. Every facility capable of artillery manufacturing was operating at full capacity. America produced approximately 43,000 artillery pieces during the same 12 months. Nearly 4 times German output, while simultaneously supplying Britain, the Soviet Union, and other allies through Lend-Lease programs. German forces in combat observed that American artillery support was overwhelming. Not because of technical superiority, German artillery pieces often exceeded American designs in range and accuracy. The advantage came purely from volume. American artillery units fired support missions that consumed more ammunition in single hours than German units received during entire weeks. This represented industrial capacity translated directly into battlefield firepower. American gunners could afford to fire preliminary bombardments, harassing fires, interdiction missions, and close support without concern for ammunition conservation. German artillery commanders rationed every shell carefully because replacement supplies arrived slowly and irregularly. Truck production represented perhaps the starkest comparison between American and German industrial capacity. Modern military operations demanded transportation above all else. Armies moved on wheels and rails rather than marching feet. Supplies required transport from ports and railheads to forward-fighting units. Wounded soldiers needed evacuation to medical facilities. Troops had to be shifted rapidly to threatened sectors. Artillery required positioning and repositioning based on tactical requirements. Military effectiveness in mechanized warfare depended fundamentally on logistics mobility. The Wehrmacht remained partially horse-drawn throughout the entire conflict. Hundreds of thousands of horses provided transportation for artillery, supplies, and equipment. This was not romantic attachment to traditional methods or cultural preference for equine transport. Germany simply lacked sufficient motor vehicles for complete mechanization. German production reached approximately 100,000 trucks during 1943. This total had to serve both military requirements and essential civilian transportation needs. The Wehrmacht never achieved complete motorization, despite desperate need for increased mobility. Infantry divisions typically relied on horse-drawn transport for artillery and heavy equipment. Supply columns moved primarily on horse-drawn wagons. Only elite formations like panzer divisions operated with full motorization. Even these premier units frequently experienced vehicle shortages that limited operational effectiveness. American production reached approximately 620,000 trucks during 1943. Nearly all of these vehicles went directly to military use. Lend-Lease programs delivered 284 trucks to the Soviet Union alone throughout the war. This exceeded Germany's total truck production for all purposes during the entire conflict. Every American infantry division possessed more organic transport capacity than German panzer divisions. American supply units operated vehicle fleets larger than those available to entire German armies. The disparity in logistics capability produced direct battlefield consequences that German commanders observed with increasing alarm. American forces could concentrate supplies for offensive operations at speeds German units could not approach. When American formations advanced, they maintained supply lines through massive motor transport efforts. Fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts flowed continuously to forward positions. The Red Ball Express, established after Normandy invasion, illustrated American logistics capacity operating at full scale. This emergency supply operation deployed 5,158 vehicles at peak strength. Trucks ran in continuous convoys along dedicated one-way roads. Record single-day tonnage reached 12,242 tons on August 29, 1944. Sustained daily averages during peak periods exceeded 7,500 tons continuously. This single supply convoy operation moved more tonnage daily than the entire German army in Western Europe received through all sources combined. German commanders studying intelligence reports understood they were witnessing something unprecedented in military history. The Red Ball Express was not even America's primary supply system. It represented an emergency measure implemented when rapid advances outran conventional logistics methods. Yet this backup emergency system exceeded total German logistics capability across all theaters. German attempts at similar supply convoys faced fuel shortages, vehicle breakdowns, Allied air attacks, and organizational problems. American convoys operated continuously despite identical challenges. They simply overwhelmed problems through sheer scale and redundancy. One truck breakdown meant another vehicle took its place immediately. Air attacks on one convoy were followed by additional convoys maintaining the flow. Material superiority was so overwhelming that operational challenges became minor inconveniences rather than insurmountable obstacles. Captured documents revealed American petroleum industry capacity. This intelligence proved particularly devastating to German strategic calculations. Germany had faced chronic fuel shortages since the conflict began. The nation possessed minimal domestic oil production. Synthetic fuel programs converted coal through Fischer-Tropsch processes at enormous resource cost. Romanian imports required maintaining control of the Balkans while protecting vulnerable supply lines. German military operations were perpetually constrained by fuel availability. Strategic decisions about offensive timing and location often depended more on fuel stocks than tactical opportunities. The 1942 summer offensive toward the Caucasus was motivated primarily by desperate need to capture Soviet oil fields, rather than territorial objectives or strategic positioning. American forces operated without any fuel constraints whatsoever. Captured supply documents showed American units in Italy receiving fuel allocations that exceeded maximum possible consumption rates. They literally possessed more petroleum than they could use efficiently. Vehicles operated for training purposes, maintenance transport, and movement of non-essential supplies that German forces would have carried by hand or left unmoved entirely. The source of this abundance became clear through intelligence analysis of American petroleum production. 1943, American oil output reached approximately 1.4 billion barrels. This represented roughly two-thirds of total world petroleum production. The United States produced more oil than all other nations combined. Germany, with synthetic production, and Romanian imports, managed perhaps 40 to 50 million barrels annually. Less than 4% of American output flowed through German pipelines. American forward logistics included fuel depots and tanker trucks in quantities exceeding Germany's total national petroleum reserves. Captured documents referenced fuel being used for heating buildings, running electrical generators for non-essential purposes, and powering vehicles for recreational transportation. Waste of petroleum for purposes that German commanders would consider criminally negligent was routine in American operations. During the Battle of the Bulge, German planning explicitly depended on capturing American fuel depots. The Wehrmacht could not supply sufficient petroleum for the offensive through its own logistics network. This dependency on capturing enemy supplies represented clear admission of German logistical weakness and strategic desperation. No successful military strategy could rely on seizing enemy resources for sustaining operations. Steel production statistics underlined every other industrial comparison because steel formed the foundation of industrial warfare. Weapons required steel, vehicles needed steel, ships consumed steel, infrastructure demanded steel, tools used steel. Military production in mechanized conflict was fundamentally constrained by steel availability. Germany produced approximately 30 million tons of steel during 1943. This represented maximum output from German industrial capacity plus captured European steel production. The figure included output from occupied French, Belgian, and Czechoslovak steel mills operating under German direction. It represented total mobilization of every available steel-producing facility across the German Empire. The United States produced 81 million tons of steel during 1943. America manufactured nearly 3 tons of steel for every ton that German mills produced. The Soviet Union maintained approximately 18 million tons of production despite massive industrial evacuation and German destruction of Western manufacturing areas. Combined Allied steel production approached 150 million tons compared to German output of 30 million tons, a 5-to-1 advantage that translated directly into weapons production capacity. More steel meant more tanks rolling off assembly lines. More steel meant more ships sliding down launching ways. More steel meant more artillery pieces emerging from factories. More steel meant more trucks, aircraft, ammunition, and everything else required for industrial warfare. The steel production gap could not be overcome through superior tactics, better training, or ideological commitment. It represented a fundamental resource constraint that determined maximum possible military production. Germany was fighting a 5-front war with 1/5 the steel production of its combined enemies. Western Europe demanded resources. The Eastern Front consumed materials. Italy required supplies. The air war over Germany needed fighter aircraft. The Atlantic Ocean battle called for submarines. Mathematics of defeat were written clearly in steel production statistics. Colonel Galen and Colonel von Rowena spent weeks during late 1943 analyzing these figures with growing desperation. They cross-referenced multiple sources searching for errors or exaggerations that might make the picture less catastrophic. They found none whatsoever. Every intelligence source confirmed the same basic reality. They consulted other analysts from Foreign Armies East and Foreign Armies West. Independent assessments reached identical conclusions without exception. America possessed industrial capacity that made German production appear like cottage industry. The Soviet Union had successfully evacuated and rebuilt manufacturing capability exceeding German output despite massive territorial losses. Britain maintained production sufficient to supply modern armies while developing advanced technologies like radar, jet engines, and code-breaking equipment. Germany faced three major opponents. Each possessed greater industrial capacity than Germany in multiple categories. Combined Allied production advantages were overwhelming across every significant type of military equipment. The only remaining question was how long German tactical superiority and defensive advantages could delay inevitable defeat. The analysts prepared a comprehensive report for German High Command in December 1943. The document was clinical, mathematical, and undeniable in its logical progression. It compared German production capacity to Allied output across every significant category of military hardware: tanks, artillery, aircraft, trucks, ships, ammunition, fuel, steel. Every comparison revealed the same story. Germany was outproduced in every category by significant margins. The gaps were widening rather than narrowing as the war progressed. The report extended beyond simple presentation of production numbers. Analysts included detailed projections of what these production figures meant for military operations over the following 12 to 24 months. They calculated that Allied production advantages would create increasing numerical superiority in every theater of operations. German forces could continue winning individual battles through superior tactics, better training, and sometimes superior equipment quality. But they would inevitably lose entire campaigns through relentless attrition. Every destroyed tank would be replaced for the Allies within weeks or months. German losses required much longer replacement periods, if replacement occurred at all. The mathematics of attrition warfare inexorably favored the side with industrial capacity to sustain losses indefinitely. That side was clearly not Germany. Projections for 1944 and beyond painted an increasingly grim picture. If current production trends continued, Allied forces would achieve numerical superiority ratios of 3-to-1 or greater in most combat categories by mid-1944. By 1945, ratios would likely reach 5-to-1 or higher across many equipment types. German forces, regardless of training quality or tactical proficiency, could not sustain combat against such overwhelming numerical odds indefinitely. Quality advantages in individual weapon systems became strategically irrelevant when facing 5 times as many enemy weapons. Even if German units maintained tactical superiority and won every engagement, cumulative losses would eventually destroy the Wehrmacht through simple mathematical attrition. Available manpower was finite. Industrial capacity remained constrained. Territory was being lost rather than gained, reducing access to critical resources. The trajectory pointed inexorably toward complete defeat. The report concluded with mathematical certainty that Germany could not achieve victory through military means given the current industrial balance. This was not defeatism or political opinion. It represented objective analysis based on verified intelligence data. The conclusion stood as professional assessment that should inform strategic decision-making. The analysts expected High Command to use this information for developing realistic strategic alternatives. Perhaps Germany could seek diplomatic solutions while still holding significant territory and maintaining some bargaining position. Perhaps resources could be reallocated toward defensive operations that might extend the conflict while pursuing political settlement. Perhaps the information could guide decisions about which territories to prioritize holding and which to abandon. At minimum, realistic understanding might prevent wasteful offensive operations consuming irreplaceable resources without achieving strategic objectives. Colonel von Roena presented this comprehensive report to his superiors with full knowledge of its controversial implications. He was not a defeatist by nature or inclination. His professional record demonstrated unwavering commitment to German victory through years of distinguished service. He was not a traitor to the fatherland. His Prussian military heritage and personal honor were beyond question or reproach. He served as a professional intelligence officer, presenting accurate analysis so that leadership could make informed, strategic decisions. He anticipated disagreement with the conclusions. Perhaps anger at such unwelcome findings would be understandable. What he encountered proved far worse than expected disagreement. Complete rejection of the analysis itself occurred at the highest levels. Hitler refused to accept the report's conclusions outright. He dismissed them as defeatist propaganda designed to undermine German morale and fighting spirit. He argued that German willpower, superior tactical methods, and impending technological advances would overcome numerical disadvantages through sheer determination. He cited historical examples of smaller forces defeating larger opponents through skill and resolve. Frederick the Great's victories when outnumbered against European coalitions. Hannibal's spectacular victories over numerically superior Roman armies. Napoleon's early campaigns that conquered Europe despite numerical inferiority. He insisted that Allied production figures were deliberately exaggerated for propaganda purposes. American equipment was inferior and would fail when tested in real combat conditions. Soviet industry would inevitably collapse under continued German military pressure. Britain was approaching complete economic exhaustion and could not sustain current production levels indefinitely. Other commanders and Nazi leadership figures responded in strikingly similar ways. They clutched desperately at tactical victories that still occurred on scattered battlefields. They pointed with pride to German weapons that remained superior in individual categories. The Panther tank could outfight any Allied tank in single combat. The Me-262 jet fighter flew circles around conventional Allied aircraft. Fortified defensive positions still gave German troops advantages against attacking forces. These leaders argued with passionate conviction that German soldiers possessed better training than their enemies. They insisted German officers demonstrated superior leadership under pressure. They claimed ideological motivation made German troops fight harder than Allied forces motivated only by democracy and materialism. The Nazi worldview demanded that superior will and racial destiny would triumph over mere numbers. They maintained their faith that tactical excellence could overcome any numerical disadvantage. Some military leaders argued desperately that secret weapons still under development would change everything. Advanced jet aircraft rolling off production lines would clear the skies. Improved U-boats with better technology would strangle Allied shipping lanes. V-weapons raining down on London would break British morale and force negotiation. Von Röner attempted repeatedly to explain harsh mathematical realities to these true believers. He tried to make them understand that individual tactical superiority became completely irrelevant when facing overwhelming material advantages. He showed them calculations proving that quality differences vanished entirely when confronting enemies with 5 times the resources. He demonstrated through captured documents that even the best trained troops could not fight effectively without adequate fuel supplies, without sufficient ammunition stocks, without replacement equipment arriving regularly. His careful arguments were dismissed immediately as dangerous defeatism. His detailed reports were filed away without serious consideration. His mathematical proofs were ignored completely. The German High Command's systematic rejection of these intelligence assessments represented something far more serious than simple optimism. It revealed a fundamental failure to understand how modern industrial warfare actually functioned at the most basic level. Military traditions developed over thousands of years emphasized certain factors as decisive in warfare. Personal courage on the battlefield had won countless victories throughout history. Individual skill with weapons had determined outcomes since ancient times. Leadership quality had separated winning armies from losing ones. Tactical brilliance had overcome numerical disadvantages repeatedly across centuries. These qualities had proven their worth in warfare for millennia. Individual warriors with superior training and equipment could routinely defeat much larger numbers of inferior opponents. Superior tactical formations and battlefield maneuvers could overcome significant numerical disadvantages. Brilliant commanders could achieve stunning victories through clever maneuvers and battlefield deception. Alexander the Great had conquered vast empires with relatively small but expertly trained forces. Napoleon had defeated coalition armies many times larger through superior tactics and leadership. Frederick the Great had won wars against multiple enemies through tactical genius and personal courage. But World War II represented something completely different from all previous military conflicts in human history. This was the first truly industrial total war where ultimate victory depended much more on factory output than battlefield performance. The nation capable of producing more tanks would win through simple mathematical attrition. The country building more aircraft would control the skies regardless of pilot skill. The industrial power manufacturing more guns and ammunition would outlast enemies regardless of tactical considerations. Germany's military leadership had been trained extensively in traditional Prussian military methods dating back centuries. These methods emphasized individual excellence, personal courage, tactical brilliance, superior training. These officers could not psychologically accept that such traditional military virtues had become secondary considerations in industrial warfare. But some German officers did grasp these new realities with crystal clarity. General Heinz Guderian ranked among Germany's greatest tank commanders and theorists of armored warfare. He wrote extensively in his memoirs about studying captured American equipment and supply documents with growing alarm. He concluded with mathematical certainty that Germany was fighting an enemy with essentially unlimited industrial resources. Victory was impossible under these circumstances, regardless of German tactical superiority. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel reached identical conclusions after fighting British and American forces across multiple theaters. North Africa taught him about Allied material superiority. Italy reinforced these lessons with brutal clarity. France confirmed what he already suspected about industrial capacity determining outcomes. He noted repeatedly in personal letters to his wife and in official military reports that German tactical superiority meant absolutely nothing against enemies who could replace combat losses immediately. Meanwhile, German units fought with steadily dwindling resources that could never be adequately replenished. In 1944, these realizations would drive Rommel to active participation in the conspiracy against Hitler. His involvement stemmed partly from this recognition that the war could not possibly be won through military means. The mathematics of industrial production made German defeat inevitable. Continuing the fight would only increase the magnitude of ultimate destruction. Albert Speer received appointment as Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production in February 1942. He understood the production gap separating Germany from its enemies better than almost anyone in Nazi leadership. He worked frantically to increase German industrial output through any means available. He achieved significant increases through rationalization of production processes. Better resource allocation throughout German industry. Ruthless exploitation of slave labor from occupied territories. German production increased substantially under Speer's energetic direction. 1943 and 1944 witnessed peak German output in most military categories. Aircraft production reached its highest levels. Tank manufacturing achieved record numbers. Artillery pieces rolled off assembly lines faster than ever before. Germany was producing more weapons than at any previous point in the war. But Speer knew with devastating clarity that his efforts remained completely insufficient. After Allied bombing campaigns against synthetic oil facilities began in May 1944, Speer concluded that the war was economically lost beyond any possibility of recovery. The May 12, 1944 bombing attack against the Leuna synthetic oil plant marked a decisive moment. In Speer's later words, that single day determined when the technological war was decided conclusively. He would state, years after the war, that on that specific day, it became crystal clear to everyone working in German industry that they had lost the war completely. Yet he continued demanding impossible production increases from exhausted workers, making speeches about secret weapons that would change everything, promising ultimate victory that he knew was mathematically impossible. His worldview and political position left no alternative to continued public optimism. The intelligence analysts continued their painstaking work throughout 1944. They documented every aspect of Allied superiority with mathematical precision. Their reports were systematically dismissed or completely ignored by Nazi leadership. But they kept working because professional duty demanded accurate assessment regardless of political consequences. They documented the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, with the same mathematical precision they had applied to production statistics for months. The initial landing involved approximately 5,000 ships of various types carrying 6,000 troops in the first day alone. Millions more would follow in subsequent months. The logistical planning and flawless execution involved in such a massive operation exceeded anything Germany had attempted, even at the peak of its military power. The artificial mulberry harbors deployed to support the invasion represented engineering and industrial capacity that German forces simply could not match under any circumstances. These were temporary harbors, built completely in Britain, towed across the English Channel in sections. Assembled off the Normandy coast with mechanical precision, each Mulberry Harbor measured roughly the size of Dover Harbor. Dover represented Britain's major commercial port, but these artificial harbors were built specifically for this single invasion. They were considered completely expendable after serving their purpose. Within weeks of the initial landing, Allied forces were receiving supplies through these artificial harbors at rates that would have sustained the entire Wehrmacht. Supply depots established in the Normandy beachhead contained more military material than existed in all of Germany combined. Photographic reconnaissance missions showed fuel dumps stretching for miles, ammunition stockpiles covering entire square miles of territory, vehicle parks containing thousands of trucks and tanks, supply warehouses that dwarfed anything in German logistics. Allied logistics operated at scales that made German supply operations appear primitive and inadequate. American combat units consumed supplies at rates German forces could not imagine sustaining for even short periods. Artillery units fired support missions measured in thousands of rounds per day. Individual battles consumed more ammunition than German factories could produce in weeks. Infantry units received daily resupply with fresh food, ammunition, replacement equipment, medical supplies. Vehicle maintenance was supported by mobile repair facilities carrying enormous inventories of spare parts. These mobile workshops could rebuild entire tank engines in field conditions. Medical care included frontline surgical hospitals equipped with supplies and equipment superior to most civilian hospitals remaining in Germany. Every aspect of American logistics demonstrated industrial capacity beyond German comprehension. The intelligence services documented American air operations in Europe with similar mathematical precision. By late 1944, American and British air forces were flying thousands of sorties daily against German targets, dropping thousands of tons of bombs on industrial facilities, transportation networks, military installations, losing hundreds of aircraft to German flak and fighters, replacing those combat losses immediately with fresh aircraft and crews. The 8th Air Force operating from British bases alone possessed more combat aircraft than the entire Luftwaffe. A single American bomb group, roughly equivalent to a German Geschwader, operated more aircraft than some complete German Fliegerkorps. The numerical disparity was overwhelming and growing worse every month. German aircraft production, despite Speer's desperate efforts, peaked at approximately 399,870 aircraft in 1944 before declining sharply. Combined effects of Allied bombing campaigns, critical fuel shortages, and resource constraints made higher production impossible. American production in 1944 reached 96318 aircraft of all types. The Americans were building more than 2 aircraft for every single aircraft Germany produced. American aircraft were increasingly sophisticated technologically. Long-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang could escort bombers deep into Germany. Heavy bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator carried enormous bomb loads. Specialized aircraft existed for every conceivable military role. The sky belonged completely to the Allies by 1944 because American factories could build airplanes faster than German pilots, and flak guns could shoot them down. The Luftwaffe was dying slowly through inevitable attrition. Experienced pilots were being lost faster than training programs could replace them. Aviation fuel was being rationed to impossibly low levels. Aircraft were flying outnumbered by factors of 5 to 1 or higher in every engagement. Combat effectiveness declined precipitously under these conditions. German jet aircraft like the Me-262 represented clear technological superiority over conventional Allied fighters. But Germany produced only approximately 1,462 total throughout the entire war. They were outnumbered by thousands upon thousands of Allied conventional fighters. Advanced technology could not change the strategic balance when deployed in such small numbers. Quality became completely irrelevant when facing overwhelming quantity deployed effectively. The final devastating intelligence assessments came in late 1944 through detailed analysis of Allied logistics operations in France. After the Normandy breakout in late July and August, American forces advanced rapidly across French territory. Liberation of Paris occurred ahead of schedule. American armies pushed steadily toward the German border. For a brief period in late August and early September, American forces actually outran their own supply lines completely. Supply trucks were traveling hundreds of miles from the Normandy beaches to advancing combat units. These trucks were consuming enormous amounts of precious fuel just for the journey itself. This logistical strain should have created golden opportunities for German counterattacks against overextended Allied forces with vulnerable supply lines stretched beyond sustainable limits. Instead, the Americans simply began flying supplies forward by air. The intelligence reports documented with mathematical precision that American forces were receiving supplies by air transport in quantities that exceeded what German ground forces could transport by truck and rail combined. Thousands of C-47 transport aircraft were flying multiple missions daily. They delivered fuel, ammunition, and food to advancing armies without interruption. During the period when ground supply lines were temporarily constrained, American transport aircraft delivered thousands of tons of supplies every single day. This air supply capability alone exceeded Germany's entire logistics capacity across all theaters. The analysis was devastating to German strategic assumptions. America possessed so much transport capacity that they routinely used aircraft for basic supply missions. Aircraft represented expensive, complex, resource-intensive military equipment. Germany could barely supply frontline units adequately using trucks and trains. America was using aircraft for routine logistics simply because air transport proved faster than ground transport. One particular example, documented by intelligence, illustrated the overwhelming disparity with painful clarity. General George Pattons' Third Army advanced so rapidly in August 1944 that ground supply lines could not maintain adequate pace. The Army temporarily halted due to fuel shortages in early September. This demonstrated that even American logistics had certain physical limits under extreme circumstances. But the halt lasted only a few days. Emergency air supply operations delivered sufficient fuel to resume the advance within 72 hours. German intelligence calculated carefully that the tonnage flown to Third Army in 1 week exceeded what the entire Luftwaffe could have transported in a full month, even at full strength with unlimited fuel supplies. The Luftwaffe in September 1944 had neither full strength nor unlimited fuel. It operated at a small fraction of its former capacity. Fuel rationing limited flight operations. Aircraft losses exceeded replacement rates consistently. By late 1944, the intelligence services were documenting not just American material superiority, but the immediate implications of that superiority for Germany's national survival. Soviet forces were advancing steadily from the east with massive numerical advantages in tanks, artillery, aircraft, and infantry. Soviet industrial production had recovered completely from initial German advances. Recovery was being supplemented by enormous American Lend-Lease shipments: 400,000 trucks, 12,000 armored vehicles, 11,000 aircraft, enormous quantities of food, fuel, raw materials, industrial equipment. British and American forces advanced relentlessly from the west, with complete air superiority and overwhelming logistics support. German forces continued fighting skillfully in individual engagements. They still conducted occasional tactical masterpieces against local Allied units. They still extracted heavy casualties from attacking forces when conditions permitted. But the strategic outcome was never in serious doubt. The numbers made ultimate defeat mathematically inevitable. The Ardennes offensive in December 1944 represented Germany's last major attack in the Western theater. This offensive demonstrated with brutal clarity the complete futility of fighting against such overwhelming industrial superiority. German forces achieved complete tactical surprise through careful security measures and strict radio silence. They achieved significant initial tactical success, driving through American defensive lines, capturing substantial territory, causing genuine panic in Allied rear areas throughout the region. The offensive advanced significantly in the first few days of fighting. Early success seemed to validate Hitler's continuing faith in willpower and tactical skill over mere numbers. But the offensive was doomed completely before it even began. Not by any failure of planning or tactical execution, but by simple logistics mathematics that made success impossible. German operational plans explicitly depended on capturing American fuel depots to sustain the attack beyond the first few days. The Wehrmacht could not supply sufficient fuel through its own logistics system for an offensive of this scale and duration. Hitler himself stated clearly that German forces would have to rely completely on capturing Allied supply dumps during their westward push. Kampfgruppe Piper, the spearhead armored formation, specifically targeted American fuel depots as primary objectives. They came within 1,000 feet of a major fuel storage facility at Stavelot before American forces managed to set it ablaze. This desperate dependency on capturing enemy supplies represented clear admission of German logistical weakness and strategic desperation. No successful military operation should ever depend on seizing enemy resources to continue functioning. That the German High Command approved such a fundamentally flawed plan demonstrated how completely divorced from reality their strategic thinking had become. When American forces recovered from initial tactical surprise and brought their overwhelming material superiority to bear, the German offensive collapsed completely within weeks. American units that suffered heavy initial losses were reinforced and resupplied within days. Fresh divisions arrived by truck and train. New equipment replaced combat losses immediately. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded at Bastogne, was sustained entirely by air supply, while American armored forces fought through to relieve them. German forces that initially advanced rapidly found themselves completely immobilized by fuel shortages. They came under constant air attack when weather conditions cleared. They faced enemy reinforcements arriving faster than German commanders thought physically possible. The offensive consumed Germany's last operational reserves of fuel, armor, and experienced troops. The strategic gain was absolutely nothing whatsoever. Intelligence analysis of the Ardennes operation confirmed all earlier assessments with brutal mathematical clarity. American forces lost heavily in the initial fighting phases. Approximately 19,000 killed in action. 47,500 wounded requiring medical evacuation. 23,000 captured or missing in action. These represented serious tactical losses by any military standard, but American losses were replaced completely within weeks of the fighting's conclusion. Within 1 month, American forces deployed in the region were actually stronger than before the German offensive began. Fresh divisions arrived from the United States, new equipment rolled off assembly lines, replacement personnel completed training programs. American military strength was growing rather than declining despite combat losses. German losses were proportionally smaller in absolute numbers. Approximately 12,000 killed in action, 38,000 wounded requiring medical care, 3,000 captured or missing in action. But German losses were completely irreplaceable under existing circumstances. Germany possessed no strategic reserves whatsoever. The experienced troops lost in the Ardennes could not be replaced by any training program. The panzers destroyed could not be rebuilt in existing factories. The fuel consumed was gone forever. The battle demonstrated in perfect microcosm what intelligence analysts had been documenting systematically for years. German tactical skill and initial battlefield success meant absolutely nothing against enemies who could absorb heavy losses and continue fighting with undiminished strength. German strength declined inexorably with every engagement regardless of tactical outcomes. Colonel Alexis von Röner did not live to witness Germany's final military defeat. He was arrested in July 1944 for peripheral connections to the July 20th plot against Hitler's life. Though his actual involvement was minimal, he knew about the conspiracy but did not participate actively in planning or execution. The Nazi regime executed him on October 12, 1944, at Plötzensee prison in Berlin. His death removed one of Germany's most accurate intelligence analysts from active service, a professional who had tried repeatedly to provide completely objective assessments of enemy capabilities to inform strategic decision-making. Historians would later discover that von Röner had been secretly anti-Nazi for years. He had deliberately passed deceptive information about Allied D-Day preparations to Hitler, making him an unwitting Allied intelligence asset while ostensibly serving German interests. His execution was both personally tragic and professionally symbolic. Nazi Germany was literally killing the messenger for bringing unwelcome truths to leadership. Colonel Gehlen survived the war's conclusion successfully. In the final months, he organized the systematic preservation of von Röner's extensive intelligence files, microfilming thousands of documents, hiding them carefully in remote locations throughout the Bavarian Alps. After German surrender, he contacted advancing American forces immediately. He offered his complete intelligence files and professional expertise to former enemies. The Americans recognized the enormous value of his detailed knowledge about Soviet military forces as the Cold War began developing. They employed him in various intelligence capacities. He would later lead West German intelligence services during Reconstruction. His analytical capabilities were recognized even by former enemies who had fought against Germany. The von Röner intelligence files he preserved became valuable intelligence assets for Western Allied forces. These documents provided detailed assessments of Soviet military capabilities, industrial capacity, and strategic intentions. Information that proved crucial during early Cold War confrontations. The story of German intelligence analysis during World War II reveals profound truths about modern warfare that remain completely relevant decades later. Industrial capacity ultimately determines victory in total war between modern industrial nations. Personal courage matters significantly. Individual skill affects battlefield outcomes. Tactical brilliance can achieve local successes. Ideological fervor can motivate extraordinary sacrifices. All these factors remain important in military operations, but none of them can overcome overwhelming material disadvantage in sustained industrial warfare. The Germans discovered this harsh truth through careful analysis of captured American supply documents, systematic examination of production statistics from multiple sources, rigorous mathematical calculations that could not be disputed. They presented this truth to their political leadership repeatedly throughout 1943 and 1944. Their professional warnings were systematically ignored because accepting them meant accepting inevitable military defeat. The captured American supply charts and logistics documents that shocked German analysts in late 1943 were not secret weapons or classified military technologies. They were mundane bureaucratic paperwork, routine accounting of supplies received and consumed by combat units, standard military logistics documentation used throughout the American military. Their devastating power lay not in revealing military secrets, but in demonstrating basic economic reality. America could produce, transport, and consume military supplies at scales Germany could not possibly match under any circumstances. This simple truth, confirmed through painstaking intelligence analysis, determined the war's ultimate outcome more surely than any individual battle or campaign. Logistics represents the unglamorous but absolutely essential foundation of military power in modern warfare. An army without adequate fuel cannot move effectively. An army without sufficient ammunition cannot fight successfully. An army without regular food supplies cannot survive extended operations. Superior tactics mean absolutely nothing when soldiers lack the basic material means to execute them properly. The mathematical impossibility of German victory was crystal clear to professional intelligence analysts by late 1943. Every subsequent month confirmed and amplified this devastating conclusion with additional data from multiple sources. American industrial production increased steadily while German production stagnated or declined under relentless Allied bombing campaigns. Soviet production recovered completely and expanded beyond German industrial capacity. British production, though smaller in absolute terms, contributed crucial technologies and significant material quantities. The combined Allied production advantage grew from 3-1 in 1943 to 5-1 or greater by 1945. Some categories showed even greater disparities. The human cost of ignoring these intelligence assessments was absolutely staggering and deeply tragic. Germany continued fighting for approximately 18 months after intelligence services concluded that victory was mathematically impossible. Millions of people died in fighting that professional analysts knew could not change the ultimate strategic outcome under any circumstances. Entire cities were destroyed by bombing campaigns. Civilian populations were decimated by warfare. Europe was devastated by prolonged conflict. Jewish communities were systematically annihilated. All this destruction occurred while detailed intelligence reports sat in files documenting the mathematical certainty of ultimate defeat. The tragedy was not simply that Germany lost the war militarily. The tragedy was that this loss was completely predictable, thoroughly documented, and clearly presented to leadership who refused to accept mathematical reality. The German intelligence analysts who studied American supply capabilities and production statistics performed their professional duties with complete competence and absolute integrity. They gathered detailed information from multiple independent sources. They analyzed data carefully and systematically using proven methods. They presented conclusions based entirely on evidence rather than ideology or wishful thinking. Their work represented exactly what intelligence services should do: provide accurate assessments to enable informed decision-making by political and military leadership. That their professional conclusions were systematically ignored and rejected represents complete failure. Not failure of intelligence analysis, but failure of leadership unwilling to accept unpleasant truths about strategic reality. The mathematical proof of inevitable German defeat existed clearly in captured supply manifests. These documents showed American corps receiving more material daily than entire German armies. It existed in production statistics showing American factories building more weapons in months than Germany produced in years. It existed in shipping data showing America launching merchant vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. It existed in petroleum production figures showing American fuel abundance while German forces rationed every drop. It existed in steel production comparisons showing Allied output exceeding German capacity by 5 to 1 or greater. It existed in truck production statistics showing American logistics capacity that made German operations appear primitive. The proof was comprehensive, verified from multiple independent sources, mathematically undeniable, and systematically ignored by those with power to act on it. Looking back from the perspective of 8 decades, the German intelligence assessments of 1943 and 1944 appear both remarkably prescient and tragically futile. The analysts were completely correct in every major conclusion they reached. Military victory was impossible, given the industrial balance of forces. The mathematics of industrial attrition made ultimate defeat inevitable, regardless of battlefield performance. No amount of tactical skill or fighting spirit could overcome such fundamental material disadvantage in sustained warfare. But this accurate knowledge changed absolutely nothing because Nazi leadership chose to believe in willpower, racial ideology, and historical destiny rather than simple arithmetic. The war continued relentlessly until Germany's complete military collapse, until major cities were smoking ruins, until millions more people were dead, until the Third Reich was utterly destroyed as a political entity, until the evidence of defeat was written not in captured documents and production statistics, but in occupied territory and unconditional surrender. The lesson from this historical episode transcends World War II specifically and remains completely relevant for understanding conflict between modern industrial nations. Accurate intelligence analysis is worthless if political leadership refuses to accept unwelcome conclusions about strategic reality. Systematic analysis means nothing if critical decisions are based on ideology rather than evidence. Professional competence becomes irrelevant when confronted with willful blindness at the highest levels of government. German intelligence provided completely accurate assessments of enemy capabilities and probable strategic outcomes. German political leadership chose comfortable fantasy over harsh reality. The result was national catastrophe that might have been limited or mitigated through earlier acceptance of mathematical truth. Wars between major industrial powers are fundamentally economic contests. Victory is won in factories and production lines before final outcomes are decided on battlefields. This principle was proven definitively during World War II. Germany's professional intelligence analysts understood this reality clearly by 1943. They documented it meticulously through thousands of reports. They presented it clearly to political and military leadership. They warned repeatedly that continued fighting would only increase the magnitude of ultimate defeat without changing the inevitable outcome. Their leadership never accepted this mathematical truth. The cost of that systematic refusal was measured in millions of lives lost. Destroyed cities across Europe. Germany's complete destruction as a nation-state in May 1945. The captured American supply charts and logistics documents represented clear evidence of a simple but decisive reality. America could produce more, transport more, and consume more military supplies than Germany under any conceivable circumstances. This advantage was not marginal or temporary. It was overwhelming and sufficient to make German defeat inevitable, regardless of battlefield performance or tactical brilliance. Advantages of 3 to 1 in industrial production can sometimes be overcome through superior tactics, better military equipment, or advantageous terrain. 5-to-1 advantages cannot be overcome except through enemy mistakes so massive as to be completely unlikely. The Allied advantage exceeded 5-to-1 in many critical categories and was growing larger over time. In the end, German intelligence analysts studied captured American supply charts and understood with devastating clarity that they could never win. Not through any single dramatic revelation, but through systematic accumulation of undeniable evidence over many months of careful work. Each captured document added crucial data points to their analysis. Each production statistic confirmed emerging patterns. Each prisoner interrogation provided additional validation. Each agent report corroborated previous intelligence assessments. The picture that gradually emerged was complete, independently verified, and mathematically certain. Germany faced enemies with 3 to 5 times its industrial capacity in most categories. That gap was widening steadily rather than narrowing. No amount of tactical skill or ideological fighting spirit could overcome such fundamental disparity in a war of industrial attrition. The analysts knew this with complete certainty. They documented it meticulously in thousands of reports. They presented it clearly to those with authority to act. Their tragedy was not analytical failure or professional incompetence. Their tragedy was the complete irrelevance of accurate intelligence when leadership systematically refuses to accept reality. The captured supply documents told a clear story of inevitable defeat, written in numbers that could not be argued with or dismissed through rational debate. Only through willful blindness could such evidence be ignored. They showed American material abundance that seemed impossible according to German wartime experience, but was verified through multiple independent sources. They revealed an enemy with such overwhelming industrial capacity that German hopes of military victory were complete fantasies disconnected from material reality. The only remaining question by late 1943 was how long Germany would continue denying what the numbers made crystal clear. How many more people would die before arithmetic replaced ideology as the basis for strategic decisions? That question was finally answered on May 7, 1945, when Germany surrendered unconditionally, defeated not primarily by superior military force, but by the mathematical certainty that industrial capacity determines victory in modern total war. The intelligence analysts who first studied those captured supply documents in late 1943 had understood this truth 18 months earlier. They had tried repeatedly to warn their political leadership. They had presented overwhelming evidence. They had demonstrated the mathematical impossibility of victory. Their professional warnings were systematically ignored, and millions of people paid the ultimate price for that willful blindness. The captured American supply charts documented not just military logistics operations, but the complete futility of fighting against overwhelming industrial superiority. The numbers told a harsh truth that German leadership psychologically could not accept. In modern industrial warfare, factories matter more than personal courage. Production lines determine outcomes more than battlefield tactics. Arithmetic always wins in the end, regardless of ideology or willpower.